Election hacking. The Department of Justice indicts a dozen Russian intelligence officers for meddling in the 2016 presidential election. UK visit. President Trump is in England and says his relationship with Prime Minister Theresa May is better than ever, despite some harsh comments. Pro-life potential. We talk with a leader in the fight for the unborn about the president's Supreme Court nominee. And can you dig it? Archaeologists make a major discovery at a church on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 13th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsbee, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Justice Department indicts 12 Russian intelligence officials for hacking during the 2016 presidential election. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein says the hackers targeted Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee. The Russians also allegedly stole voting information about 500,000 American voters. According to the charges, the goal was to interfere with the election. Russia denies any involvement. The indictment comes just days before President Trump is set to meet one-on-one with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Finland. The president is wrapping up his first official visit to the United Kingdom, where he's pressing ahead with complaints about immigration and the media. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The president's pomp-filled visit has been overshadowed by massive protest and an interview President Trump gave, at times critical of Prime Minister Theresa May. But the president was on his best behavior as he capped the trip by dropping by for tea with the Queen. President Donald Trump and Queen Elizabeth II meet on the grounds of Windsor Castle. Earlier in the day, the president said he will confront Vladimir Putin about U.S. election meddling.
I don't think you'll have any, gee, I did it, you got me. There won't be a Perry Mason here, I don't think, but you never know what happens, right? But I will absolutely, firmly ask the question.
In his press conference with Prime Minister Theresa May, the president slammed the flow of immigrants into Europe, calling it negative and saying it's changing the culture.
I know it's politically not necessarily correct to say that, but I'll say it, and I'll say it loud. And I think they better watch themselves.
May pushed back.
Overall, immigration has been good for the UK. It's brought people with different backgrounds, different outlooks here to the UK, and we've seen them contributing to our society and to our economy.
And questions continued about the president's interview with British tabloid The Sun.
It's called fake news.
But Prime Minister May denied the president's claim that the deal she is striking to pull the UK out of the European Union is not what the British people voted on. She did call President Trump a friend today as a large crowd gathered in London to protest his visit. The president characterized the current relationship between the U.S. and UK like this.
I give our relationship, in terms of grade, the highest level of special.
President Trump will now spend the weekend at his golf resort in Scotland. The White House says he will use that time to prepare for Monday's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Finland. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. First Lady Melania Trump is traveling with her husband. Today she mingled with school children and British veterans and tried her hand at a new sport. The First Lady took a turn on lawn bowls at the Royal Hospital Chelsea in London. She also met kids involved in her Be Best campaign. Melania was hosted by Philip May, the Prime Minister's husband. A House committee approves protections for Catholic adoption agencies that refuse to place kids with same-sex couples. Democrats call it a license to discriminate. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi brings us this story. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. The city of Philadelphia is the latest to say foster care agencies must place kids with same-sex couples. The House Appropriations Committee is pushing back with an amendment that is part of a broader bill. Today I spoke with its sponsor.
This is a conscience issue. And
Representative Robert Aderholt's amendment would take away some federal funds from states and cities if they force providers to place kids with same-sex couples.
anytime there's a birth mother that's making a hard decision to put their child up for adoption, it's a big decision for anyone. And I think they're going through a lot of time of crisis in their life, and sometimes they want to place their children in a traditional home. And that's what this amendment would allow them to do.
Catholic Charities has been driven out of the adoption and foster care business in Massachusetts, Illinois, California, and the District of Columbia. The reason? Refusing to place kids with same-sex or unmarried couples. Republicans say some agencies are unfairly targeted for their faith.
That's why the First Amendment exists, so that there is no religious litmus test. And that's what the opponents of this amendment are calling for.
But Democrats say the amendment puts children at risk on the taxpayer's dime.
We are going to allow taxpayer dollars to go to organizations who want to discriminate. They are absolutely entitled to do that as private adoption agencies. This is public dollars.
Adderholt says gay couples would still be able to adopt kids from other agencies.
This is not discriminating against anyone. This is just allowing these groups, religious faith groups, to not be discriminated against.
The measure passed on a party line vote. All of the Democrats and one Republican in the committee voted against the proposal. It still needs to pass the full House and then the Senate. Looking across the country, 9 states have laws to protect religious foster care and adoption agencies. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. 3 members of President Trump's cabinet met today with Mexico's president and president-elect. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo led the delegation to Mexico City. He stressed the Trump administration's eagerness to work with the country's new government. The leaders discussed migration, the opioid epidemic, and trade tensions. Nearly 130 people are killed in 2 election-related attacks in Pakistan. The deadliest came from a suicide bomber in southwestern Pakistan. The blast killed 70 people, including the candidate. The attacks constitute the deadliest violence during the country's troubled election campaign. Voting takes place July 25th. Around 60 people, including nearly 30 civilians, are dead following an airstrike in a part of eastern Syria held by ISIS. The Syrian state news says the attack came from the U.S.-led coalition, but that has not been verified. A human rights group says the strike targeted a factory families were using as a shelter. The Catholic bishops of Venezuela say the country is going in a suicidal direction under President Nicolas Maduro. They also call the socialist government arrogant and accuse it of abusing its power. Under Maduro, the country is suffering from a stalled economy and widespread food shortages. Italian prosecutors are investigating alleged threats by migrants against a tugboat crew who rescued them off the coast of Libya. Last night, an Italian Coast Guard vessel brought 67 migrants to a port in western Sicily. That's when Italy's Interior Ministry says some of the migrants allegedly tried to hijack the boat so it wouldn't return them to Libya, where migrants say they've been tortured in crowded detention centers. Authorities ultimately allowed the migrants to disembark despite the minister's opposition. Authorities have arrested a priest in Chile who was accused of sexually abusing minors. It's the latest in an ongoing scandal in the South American country. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley has more from Rome. Juliet?
Wyatt, Oscar Munoz Toledo is the first active priest to be arraigned for sexual abuse in Chile since a report that Pope Francis had ordered came out in March. Now, that document showed Chile's church to be riddled with long-term cover-ups and a culture of abuse, and Munoz is accused of abuse and statutory rape of 7 minors. He worked with 2 bishops that have been accused by victims of covering up crimes of Chile's most notorious pedophile priest, Fernando Karadima. And Wyatt, the prosecution says there could be further victims. Now, it's interesting to note that Munoz actually reported himself last January for a case of abuse, and he was scheduled to be taken to court today. Now, yesterday in Chile, police raided the southern diocese of Rancagua to seize material related to the scandal, and if he's found guilty, Munoz could be sentenced to prison. In Rome, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Juliet. The scandal battering the Chilean church reached a boiling point in May. 31 bishops offered their resignation to the Pope. So far, Francis has accepted the resignations of 5 bishops. Coming up, a pro-life leader weighs in on Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. And a Christian author shares a message of redemption and hope, even in the darkest hour. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsbee, in for Lauren Ashburn. Pro-lifers in Britain are attempting to overturn a ban on prayer and public discussion of abortion near a London area abortion clinic. Earlier this month, a UK High Court upheld a ruling that protesters can't get closer than 110 yards of that clinic. But one woman challenging the ruling says sidewalk counselors helped talk her out of an abortion 7 years ago. And back here in the United States, senators wrap up a week of debate ahead of a fierce confirmation battle for President Trump's Supreme Court pick. Pro-life activists are encouraging his critics to bring up abortion.
If the opposition and the Democratic Party wants to make abortion the issue in this Supreme Court nomination and go after Judge Kavanaugh on the issue of abortion, it will probably prove helpful to the pro-life side.
David Osteen predicts Democrat senators up for re-election will be in trouble if they vote against Judge Brett Kavanaugh. He says the majority of Americans who vote on the issue of abortion choose pro-life candidates. For more analysis, we're joined by Lydia Wheeler, a reporter for The Hill who has been covering Judge Kavanaugh. Lydia, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Will the confirmation be a big issue in terms of the midterms? And Democrats who are in red states under pressure to confirm him, how many are being affected by this?
This could very well affect the midterms. There are about 10 senators that are up for re-election that are in red states that are Democrats, and they are feeling the pressure from both sides of the aisle here to either vote for or against Kavanaugh.
This week, Judge Kavanaugh met with Republican leaders in the Senate. Will they have a hard time convincing their colleagues to confirm him?
Right, so this is kind of typical and routine. They kind of make the rounds after the nomination. They start with the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which first start hearing, that do the confirmation hearings. So they're going through the Republican side. He has not yet met with the Democrats, but so far it seems like all of their Republicans are on board in terms of committee membership. But we still have some centrist Republicans like Lisa Murkowski and Senator Susan Collins that the jury's still out on. And Senator Collins has made some comments about that she's worried about how his views on Roe v. Wade are and whether or not he would be a vote to overturn that law that gave women the right to an abortion.
Kavanaugh has been on the bench for 12 years. He served in the White House under George W. Bush. He has a lot of experience, but people are also concerned whether or not he has any skeletons in the closet. How big of a concern is that?
Right, so there is a big paper trail here, and kind of the chase is on, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone is digging through his records, and they're kind of scattered. They're all over the place. There's some in the National Archives that have to deal with his time working for the independent counsel Kenneth Starr, which did the investigation into the Clintons. And then there's his time in the Bush White House, and those are held at the Bush Library. And then there's over 300 opinions, which are already public through the federal court's online filing system called PACER. So there's a lot to go through here, and the Judiciary Committee is going to have to request these documents, and the White House is going to have to look through them and decide if any of it is privileged.
This week in the Wall Street Journal, a professor at Yale Law School highlights what she calls a lesser well-known side of Kavanaugh, which is his mentorship of women. What's his track record on that?
He seems like he is very supportive of women. I mean, when he came, he kind of gave his acceptance speech. He highlighted his mother quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And so, it remains to be seen kind of what his views are there on women's rights. So we still have a lot to look for here.
Okay, well, I'm sure, like I said, a lot more things are going to be uncovered, especially in the next few weeks, and we'll be following that. Lydia Wheeler, legal and regulatory affairs reporter for The Hill. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
A new book shares a message of hope through some of life's toughest struggles. I spoke with its author about the healing power of faith. Joining us now from Indianapolis is Erica Anderson, author of Leaving Cloud 9, the true story of a life resurrected from the ashes of poverty, trauma, and mental illness. Erica, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on.
This is your husband Rick's memoir about his tough upbringing with a mother addicted to drugs and alcohol. Why is it so important for you to share his story?
Yeah, we wanted to share my husband's story because there are so many people we believe that can relate to some of the things he went through. He grew up the son of a single mother who was a severe alcoholic, who eventually became a drug addict, experiencing everything from abuse to neglect to, witnessing domestic violence in his home, to watching his own mother even attempt suicide. And though he experienced the extreme end of some of these traumas, we know that there are thousands of people in this country that are going through parts of that. And especially because right now the opioid crisis is kind of taking over the country, and there are millions of kids that are going to be going through it now. And so we believe that it's so important to share this story because it includes hope.
In the book, you write about the luxury of the ordinary. I haven't heard that before. It's interesting, the luxury of the ordinary. Explain to our viewers what that is and why so many of us sort of take it for granted.
In my research and in talking with my husband about all that he went through, so many people that go through these things, all they want is a normal life. They don't want anything exciting. They're not looking for the next big thing. They just want to be able to live a quiet, peaceful existence where everything isn't a threat, and they don't come home to danger or anxiety or fear every single night. And that's all that he ever really hoped for in life. But unfortunately, after living through that as a child, his life and his mental space continued to be filled with fear and anxiety and depression as a result of what he went through. And until he really found freedom and healing, he didn't experience the luxury of the ordinary.
So let's go into that a little bit deeper here. How did God help your husband transform his life?
So God is really the star of the show here in this book, because though my husband was able to get himself out of that cycle of poverty and addiction, he joined the Army, he went to college, he got a job, he never really was living. It wasn't until he really hit an emotional rock bottom, having been diagnosed with PTSD, with bipolar disorder, with depression, anxiety, social anxiety disorder. I mean, so much was plaguing him from the effects of his childhood that he said to himself, I have nothing else left to try. I'm at the bottom of the pit and I don't know where else to go. And a seed had been planted in his heart, and he decided to turn to God. He decided to say, I'm going to say a prayer, I'm going to go to church, and I'm just going to see what happens. And it turns out that was the answer that he was looking for.
So you and your husband now have your own family. How has faith helped him become, as you describe it, the parent he never had?
As a small boy and just really growing up, he didn't have that father figure in his life. And he has truly gotten to know God as his father. And, I think it came full circle when our son was born, because until then, he didn't realize all the love that God could feel for him. And when that happened, and he just thought, man, if I love my son Jacob this much, imagine how much God loves me. And it just truly strengthened his faith even more and took it to another level. And it's just been wonderful to see. And now we have a daughter as well. She's 4 months old. And of course, that process was just repeated with her birth. So, kids really make you see the world differently.
Such a powerful message and a powerful story of faith, prayer, and reliance on God. Eric Anderson, author of Leaving Cloud 9, The True Story of a Life Resurrected from the Ashes of Poverty, Trauma, and Mental Illness. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you so much.
Up next, a graduate student shares Catholic culture through virtual reality. And a church offers a rare glimpse into medieval life.
Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsbee, in for Lauren Ashburn. A Harvard graduate student is pursuing his dream in Rome, bringing the beauty of the Eternal City's churches to the world through social media. Benjamin Crockett is an intern in our Rome bureau. He specializes in virtual reality and video. The California native is the man behind unique videos, including 360-degree scenes of churches in and around the city. Ben joins us now from Rome for more on this. Ben, what is virtual reality and how are you using it to evangelize?
So virtual reality is this new cinematic art form. It allows for the audience to be at the heart of an experience. I understand that virtual reality means a lot of different things to different people, from cinematic, 360-degree videos that some people see on Facebook or on YouTube, to game engine generated, big video games almost. Virtual reality, what I've been doing and the work that I've been focused on is taking it to places where Pope Francis has his intentions. So with migrants and refugees, allowing for cinema to come and to bring the audience at the heart of the experience. And what is cool about virtual reality and what separates it from other forms of cinema and video and documentation is that it registers as an in-the-body experience. It registers as a memory. And so you're able to have scale and scope. You're able to allow viewers to have almost, in a way, their own director's cut. They can pick and choose what they look at, how they look at, how they experience it. And so rather than me trying to tell you a story, you experience it. And so for the church, that has the greatest story to tell. The most important work that we can do, I think, is to bring this new technology to the front lines of the church, whether it's climate change or poverty or migrants and refugees or issues of life. You're able to immerse the audience. And I think, I sincerely believe that the more real it feels, the deeper it hits and the longer that it lasts.
Well, as you say, your videos have taken viewers to places many do not get to visit. What are some of the highlights for you?
I'm a Californian, so I had never been to Rome before. And so, coming here and shooting with Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo, the 44 station churches, we were able to shoot more virtual reality in Rome than had ever been shot before. And so, we've taken them to churches of enormous significance where there's martyrs and saints, and we're able to transport them there. And so we had, a lot of people coming into the office to try out VR in the headset, which I actually have right here. And it blows people away. I mean, just seeing the looks on people's faces afterwards, it's extraordinary.
It's incredible to think about how this technology can take people to places they never would go otherwise. How do you think the Catholic Church specifically can use this kind of VR technology?
I mean, I think the most beautiful thing about the Catholic Church is that it's universal, it's global, it's across the planet. And I think that if we can bring people to some of these places, I think we can truly transform them. We can give them, transformational experiences. We can change their heart. I think that there's a lot of things that we've seen in the past where we try to, argue someone into understanding our point of view, or we try to, talk about certain things, and it's difficult because we all have our own experiences. But I think that rather than me telling you a story, I can give you a camera, I can give you an experience, and you can discover it for yourself.
It's fascinating to think about all the possibilities. Ben, you were on a sabbatical from Harvard, which is a very secular university. How have you been able to keep up your Catholic faith and keep it really at the center of your life?
The university system, it will not confirm your faith. It will not, accompany you in a nice way. It's going to challenge you and force you to stretch and think about things in all these different crazy ways. For me, that made me stronger. I actively kind of seek out places where I'm uncomfortable, and it's forcing me to grow and to think and to see how can I evangelize better? How can I be a better, missionary for Christ? How can I, bring my talents to places, that maybe traditional Catholics, don't feel comfortable in? And so I think that, that's true about Harvard, and it's true about France, and in a lot of ways, it's true about, the modern world. But it has made me grow, and I think that going to these places where you feel lonely, you feel scared, or you start to second guess things, in weird way, you go through that journey and you come out stronger. At least that's what I found.
Well, it's so fascinating to hear about your faith journey and how you're using VR technology in order to evangelize. Benjamin Crockett from our EWTN Rome Bureau. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, archaeologists make a discovery just outside of Rome that sheds new life into life for monks in the 9th century. The new finds are at the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. That's where the remains of St. Paul are enshrined. Sources show in the year 880, a wall was built to defend the basilica from an invasion. There was also a channel for water supply, a portico with columns, and a small belfry. Last month, the archaeological site opened to the public. It's incredible to think of so much church history still being discovered even after more than 1,000 years. Well, that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsbee. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.